Welcome to Chaos Knowledge, where headlines meet depth and noise gives way to nuance. I'm your host, Afeera Firdous. Today, we are going to discuss a region haunted by partition, hardened by nationalism, and increasingly staggering on the edge of nuclear confrontation. Joining me is one of Pakistan's prominent historians, Dr. Ilhan Niaz. Dr. Ilhan is a professor of history at Qaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, and author of numerous books, including the recent one, New World Empires, Cultures of Power and Governance in the Americas. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ilhan. So let's start with the past, or rather how it is being retold. The question of partition has long shaped narratives about Pakistan, both under Congress and BJP. But under Prime Minister Modi, we have seen a more direct blame placed on the figures like Gandhi and Nehru for Pakistan's creation. In your view, is this simply political point scoring against opposition, or does it reflect a deeper ideological view about Pakistan in BJP or RSS?
The Congress view of partition, it is regarded as something that was regrettable but became impossible to avoid because of the political circumstances that prevailed at the time. Whereas if we look at the view of the Hindu nationalists, especially today, they consider Muslims to be an other, and Pakistan especially to be an other that needs to be used in order to consolidate a strong communal Hindu vote bank. Upon a majority support from Hindus, it was not an explicitly communal party. And as far as its ideology and its programs were concerned, it sought to demonstrate that partition would have been unnecessary because they wanted to build a genuinely secular democratic India that would have a very strong liberal and socialist bias. And through that, they hoped to prove partition to be an unnecessary event. But in the other side, it's quite different because baiting Muslims, cornering Muslims, using Muslims as a foil for their own political mobilization is something that is part and parcel of the Hindu nationalist political playbook. And we see this at multiple levels in terms of the incitement to mob violence, in terms of the cultural and educational changes that are taking place, in terms of the articulation of a historical perspective that essentially puts the Muslim empires before British rule at the same plane as European colonial rule. So when they talk about decolonization, they mean to also get rid of South Asian Islam and its cultural and social and political legacy. So I think in that sense, there's a very important difference. So the hostility which the Indian nationalist leaders of today show towards Pakistan is of a especially high caliber compared to what their own elders used to show, if you go back to Vajpayee and Advani and others. And definitely, it is very, very much different from what Congress leaders have shown in the past and probably still would show today if they were to return to power.
All right, so let's move from political fault lines to flowing waters and discuss a bit about Indus Waters Treaty. Much of today's debate around Indus Waters Treaty feels overly technical, there is discussion on upper riparian right versus lower riparian rights, arbitration, or treaty mechanisms. But isn't it striking how we overlook that Indus River nourished one of the world's oldest civilization, and now that in Pakistan's heartland. In that light, how do you see New Delhi's effort to alter the flow of rivers allotted to Pakistan? Would that be a threat to the survival of a centuries-old living civilization?
Look at the modern Indus Basin, we need to understand that we are in fact living in a very heavily engineered environment. And that engineered environment goes back to the period of British colonial rule when large-scale irrigation works were built, not just in what became the Pakistani Punjab, but also what became Indian Punjab. Sharing the water, therefore, was one of the most important problems between India and Pakistan when they gained independence. And to the credit of the leadership of the time, they actually were able to arrive at a fair compromise, which enabled the sharing of the waters. And that also created a mechanism for managing the flow of the water uh, in this very, very important agricultural region. So I think that notwithstanding any deeper historical aspect of the Indus, of course, there is that as well. But the modern Indus Basin is very different from the ancient Indus Basin because of this very critical aspect of heavy engineering. And managing that engineering is what the Indus Basin Treaty, Indus Waters Treaty is all about. Now, when you are talking about these rivers, you are of course talking about immense volumes of water, such large volumes of water that actually it is difficult perhaps for people to even fathom how much we are talking about, the sheer scale of it in geographic and environmental terms. And in India and in Pakistan, interestingly, you do have people who have been long critical of the Indus Waters Treaty, in the sense that there are people who feel that, well, maybe India compromised too much, and there are people here who feel that, no, we should have maybe held out for a better deal. But I think that is what's going to happen with any sensible compromise, that hardliners on both sides are going to be unhappy with the resulting compromise. Uh, Within that particular treaty, it's very important to note that the treaty itself actually does not have a provision through which it can be abrogated. It can only be replaced by a new treaty. So this is also something which we need to realize, that within this treaty, when it was framed between India and Pakistan, it was understood that this is a permanent obligation. And the only way that we can alter it is to replace it with something else. So there is no question of simply doing away with it and then unilaterally engaging with attempts to re-engineer the flow of water. Now, within that, I recall a Nepali observer, Kanak Mani Dikshit of Himal magazine, and Chinese spokesperson, Professor Gao, who maybe you've seen on social media and other places, both of them pointing out something which might be very hurtful to Indian sensitivities, and that is that actually India is not the upper riparian when it comes to the waters that flow through most of South Asia. India is at best the mid riparian. Upper riparian, that lies either in China or in Nepal. So, just from a strategic point of view, it is not in the interest of any Indian government to weaken the rights of the lower riparian over the flow of water, because they are themselves the lower riparian in relation to the Chinese, and the Chinese have a vastly greater engineering capability than the Indians, and could therefore impose diversion of water, let's say along the Brahmaputra, that would do far worse to India than what they think they might be able to do to Pakistan in 10 or 15 years' time by attempting to re-engineer the flow of the Indus. So it's really, diplomatically, it's a real own goal in that respect.
Dr. Saab, now let's zoom out to the nuclear question. You have recently written that the nuclear war between India and Pakistan could cause a global famine, affecting up to 2 billion people. Shouldn't this force a complete rethink of the risk calculus in South Asia? Do India and Pakistan still treat this as a bilateral standoff, or is there any understanding of these catastrophic global consequences?
The thing is that scientists have been warning of the consequences of a nuclear exchange, not just in terms of the direct fire involved and the immediate effects, but also the effects in terms of atmospheric disturbance. And there is a long history to it. You can go back to the early 1980s and the research that was done at that time, and you can come all the way down to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and their latest projections. And what they clearly show is that in order to cause a nuclear winter, what is more important is not the strength of the individual nuclear explosion, but the number of explosions and the amount of matter they end up burning. So India and Pakistan, between the two of them, have about 350 nuclear weapons today. And in the event of a nuclear exchange between the two, let us say 300 of those are used. And they are used as city busting attacks. So the Indians nuke our cities and we nuke their cities. So the result is that in both countries, you have a situation, assuming, let's say, 2 nukes per city, that over 100 of your cities each are destroyed, roughly. Now, the amount of smoke and particles that will eject into the stratosphere is going to dim the sunlight all over the world. And the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists estimates that this will lead to a reduction of 10 to 40% in the farming output of vital crops. The world only has, at any given point in time, enough food to feed itself for 60 days. So if you can't get fresh food out of the farms into the markets within 60 days, you start to starve. That is what the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has warned about, that in the event of even a small nuclear war between India and Pakistan, small as in compared to what would have happened between the Soviets and the Americans, where you have much larger nuclear arsenals and much more powerful nuclear weapons involved, even India and Pakistan can, between the two of them, trigger a global famine through a nuclear winter that is going to end up killing between 1 billion and 2 billion people just from the starvation effects of that famine. So we are not even talking about the hundreds of millions of people within South Asia that will end up getting killed in the initial exchange and in the aftermath of the exchange. Then when it comes to India and Pakistan themselves, we need to also reflect upon something which is very chilling. During the 1980s, UK scientists estimated that an atomic attack on even one major British city would overwhelm the entire national medical resources of the country. And here, of course, we are talking about a modern industrialized power. India and Pakistan have nothing close to the medical resources of a modern industrialized power. So we can well imagine that in the aftermath of an India-Pakistan nuclear exchange, while the world is wrestling with the onset of a famine within a couple of months, the situation within the region will actually be far worse because of the very limited medical facilities that will be available, assuming any of such facilities manage to survive the initial exchange. So, it's a very interesting thing that when I actually shared this on my Twitter and other places, one of the things that really astonished me was that so many Indians, especially, commented that you are wrong. we can win a nuclear war. Most of India is outside the range of Pakistani nuclear weapons, which is not true. All of India is actually in the range of Pakistani nuclear weapons. That, oh, yes, maybe northern half of the country would get destroyed, but we would still win. And literally one completely inane comment after another. And by the way, these weren't trolls who were simply hurling abuses. These were people who were actually thoughtfully commenting from their perspective that, oh, well, you are sort of overstating the seriousness of this. Even though it wasn't me who was overstating the seriousness of this, it was the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists that was stating this. They're the ones who are saying this. Who am I to question the consortium of the world's leading physicists and atmospheric scientists? So this is a very serious problem that in India and in Pakistan, perhaps also, we really don't understand the immediate effects even of the use of a nuclear weapon, leave alone factor in the long-term impact that it might have. So this is extremely alarming, especially as India moves away from the classical deterrence posture into a new deterrence posture where conventional warfare between India and Pakistan has suddenly become fashionable again.
So in the past crisis, outside powers, especially the US, have played a key de-escalatory role in South Asia. But today, the traditional mediators are more distracted, divided, and disinterested in this region. Is there any realistic scope for third-party crisis management now? And can external actors help reinforce deterrence instead of inflaming distrust?
I think in the recent crisis, the fact that India used its nuclear capable, but in this case, conventionally equipped BrahMos missiles on Pakistan at an initial stage of the conflict is something that really alarmed observers all over the world. And it is one of the major reasons why I think India has suffered a lot of adverse diplomatic and political consequences from its recent brinksmanship with Pakistan. And Pakistan, in contrast, has reaped a considerable larger dividend by displaying restraint at each stage of the escalation ladder. So that, in effect, is what actually triggered the intervention by the United States, which of course the Indians deny ever took place. But interestingly, in the now more than dozen statements that Trump has made, saying that the Americans intervened to, pull the two sides apart, he, in one of his statements, very clearly said that, if there is a war there, we will get the dust here too. So it's quite clear that even someone who does not have a very good grasp of technicalities on most issues, such as Trump, clearly understood that the implications of an India-Pakistan conventional war getting out of hand and usage of nuclear weapons as a result of that is something that could devastate not just India and Pakistan, but the United States as well. So that is something which certainly triggered a lot of crisis management. But the problem with crisis management is precisely that it requires a crisis to erupt first and management to take place once that crisis has erupted. Where nuclear weapons are involved, this is too dangerous to simply let more rounds take place between India and Pakistan and hope that once the rounds have started, the United States or maybe Russia and Saudi Arabia or other friendly countries, Malaysia, even other people, they can somehow intervene during the crisis and get the two sides to back off. So we are in a situation where this crisis management might well come too late. It might not be effective. And if we continue on like this, there is basically no telling whether the next time such an approach would be successful. So yes, we do need the countries that have good relations with both India and Pakistan to now get permanently engaged with the two countries in order to restore nuclear normalcy, if you will, in our region. So I am not saying that mediation will lead to Kashmir being resolved or other problems between India and Pakistan being resolved. Those are things which I don't think any foreign power can seriously help the two countries with. But regarding the use of force against each other directly, that is something where every other country in the world basically has an interest in stopping a repeat of what we saw happening back in May.
Yeah. Let's turn inwards towards the strategic doctrines. There is a growing sense that this crisis has eroded long-standing deterrence framework in South Asia. Hotlines, nuclear non-attack agreements, CBMs, they are all either broken or barely functional. What would it take to rebuild or perhaps reinvent trust in an era of hyper-nationalism, as you mentioned earlier?
I think fundamentally, when you are talking about nuclear deterrence relies upon the conflicting parties to center the end cost of nuclear escalation in their calculations and consequently be deterred from attacking each other directly because of the fear that if they do that and they get onto an escalatory pathway, it could lead to ultimately suicidal consequences for them and indeed the rest of the world. So, in a way, deterrence, when it's working, is like a sword that is sheathed. If you have to actually hit the other guy with your sword, then it means deterrence is not working. It means that you no longer accept the other person's deterrence. What this also means is that when nuclear powers pursue conflict against each other, they pursue conflict in the subconventional domain, they pursue conflict in propaganda, they pursue conflict diplomatically, economically, socially, scientifically, culturally, technologically, but they avoid coming directly to military blows. So there is an understanding in a sense that once you have nuclear weapons, you can fight a cold war against each other, but you can't fight a hot war against each other, because the consequences of getting onto that path are just too catastrophic. So no rational statesman will risk the destruction of India or the destruction of Pakistan in order to, let's say, avenge, as they see it, a terrorist attack. Because that is totally disproportionate. How can you risk the lives of 1.6 billion people, even if the other side has done a terrible terrorist attack, or you think they have done, or you have accused them of doing something horrible to you on that front? It's just not a rational cost-benefit calculus. But what happens when one of the parties in a nuclear dyad, which is what has happened in India, effectively snaps and reaches a level of insight into nuclear weapons that no previous nuclear powers have held in relation to each other? And that level of insight, as articulated by India with reference to its new normal, is that whenever there is some sort of a terrorist attack in India, and if the Indians decide that that attack originated from Pakistan or had Pakistani support in any way, shape, or form, New Delhi is going to act as judge, jury, and executioner and unleash conventional punishment on Pakistani civilian targets and on military targets in Pakistan. And that will be their equalizer, as they see it, for the perceived terrorist attack from Pakistan. Now, this is so beyond the pale of thinking about deterrence that, as I've argued, it basically means that we are in a post-deterrence period. Because deterrence only works if both you and I agree that this is how we are going to relate to each other. If one of us says, forget about it, I don't care that you have nuclear weapons, I am going to fire my missiles at you, I am going to kill your civilians in your major cities, I'm even going to lob missiles at your capital region when I feel like it, I'm going to send my air force at you in full strength, not seen basically since major military conflicts in the 20th century. And you should not do anything because officially I'm targeting terrorists in your country. So this is something which is really, really unprecedented. And when you actually plot 2016 to 2019 to 2025, the difference between these three is not just escalation, they are different from each other in terms of orders of magnitude. So from this, we can reasonably argue that the next time there is an attack by an armed group in India that the Indians decide to blame Pakistan for, the next time the Indians attack, they will not attack 8 or 9 targets in Pakistan, they will attack 30 or 40 targets in Pakistan, going by the parameters of their own earlier escalation. And if the Indians attack that many targets in Pakistan, then Pakistan, following its own policy of a quid pro quo plus, is going to have to strike maybe 50 to 100 targets back in India. And that's all out war, basically. So that is the precipice on which we are currently standing. And it's something which one of my old senior professors, Dr. Tariq Rahman, used to say when we used to talk about nuclear weapons and other such things. He used to remark, well, you can't deter the undeterrable. And that is the challenge that Pakistan now has. How do we figure out a way to basically deter a country that has psychologically broken down and whose leadership thinks that nuclear deterrence is no longer relevant? It just doesn't matter. So how do you reset? How do you regain deterrence normalcy? And I'm afraid nobody has a good answer to that question. I'm not even sure it can be restored. It's like, how do you deal with a crazy person, basically? I mean, what do? You can't reason with them, you can't talk to them, you can't even threaten them with consequences because they don't accept that those consequences are real in many cases. So, you have Indian leaders now normalizing the talk about using nuclear weapons. So this is something which is really, really extraordinary. And unfortunately, Pakistan is directly in the path of this type of thinking. So we are also in very great.
And building on your response, that New Delhi believes there is a room for limited conventional strikes without triggering Pakistan's nuclear thresholds, but Pakistan sees no such space, right? Do you think the long-held beliefs of mutually assured destruction, the concept of MAD from the Cold War era, are now lost on military planners on both sides, or do you think that is simply on the case in New Delhi?
I think Pakistan so far has shown that it remains committed to deterrence normalcy. And India has indicated that it is a deterrence revisionist power. So when Pakistan talks about the quid pro quo plus response, it is essentially ceding the initiative to India. It is saying that, okay, you will hit us first and we'll take your hit. We'll see how bad your hit is, and then we will respond proportionately to that, plus minus 5-10%. So, in a sense, Pakistan is adopting a defensive posture. And that is something that indicates that our planners are far more cautious, and I would also argue at one level, far more conservative in their thinking when it comes to the employment of a nuclear deterrent. So Pakistan is still respecting India's nuclear deterrent in that sense by saying we are not going to be the first ones to initiate such an exchange. While India is saying that no, we are not going to respect your nuclear deterrent. In fact, the Indians refer to Pakistan's nuclear deterrent now as a sort of nuclear blackmail. And they're saying we are not going to be blackmailed by your possession of nuclear weapons into not hitting you anytime we feel you have conducted some sort of armed insurgent strike within Indian territory or Indian occupied territory, as the case might be. So uh, this is something where I think our thinkers need to actually, get down to work and have a much broader consultation and try to actually figure out what to do about the Indian thinking.
And do you think this post deterrence thinking has been shaped by the political rhetoric? I'm referring to Prime Minister Modi's speech after US ceasefire announcement, where he called for a new normal in response to the attacks that you mentioned already in the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir, or even in the Indian mainland. Is that a rhetorical shift driving strategic uh, risk taking or merely reflecting it?
At the 2019 Balakot crisis between India and Pakistan, what you see is that Modi reaped a very rich political reward from it. And attacking Pakistan, uh, claiming to have carried out an attack on Pakistan, uh, is something which resonates very, very deeply with not just Narendra Modi's base, but the broader media ecosystem and popular sentiment in India. So it is politically very rewarding to hit Pakistan. So at present, it appears that Modi's move on Pakistan was also determined by domestic political calculations. But the Pakistani response this time denied him the kind of easy win on the domestic front that he was perhaps hoping for. So the Pakistani response, while measured, managed to do enough damage to the Indians, not just militarily, but also politically and diplomatically, that he could not get away with it this time the way he managed in 2019. Now, it remains to be seen what lesson he will derive from this. One lesson that he might derive from this is that next time we should try and hit Pakistan so hard that they are unable to give a proportionate response at all. Another lesson that he might derive from this is that, okay, I will keep talking big and I will keep up my popular bluster, but it's really not worth it to step on this rattlesnake again and again. Let me de facto just freeze this issue, and maybe at some future stage, 5, 6, 7 years down the line, if we need to, we will hit Pakistan again. But for now, let's just uh, keep it to a war of words. Now, the problem for Pakistan is that we don't really know what he is thinking. What he has said is clearly escalatory. What India has done in Operation Sindoor is also clearly escalatory. And given the combination of escalatory rhetoric preceded by escalatory behavior, we can only presume that this escalatory trajectory is going to continue moving in an upward direction. So the rhetoric will keep getting more severe, and the next time the action will also have to be matching that rhetoric. So for this sense, Modi in a way has painted India into a corner. He's painted himself into a corner. That rather than having more options vis-a-vis Pakistan, India has fewer and fewer options. And rather than having positive leverage over Pakistan, which India could easily get through trade, through other things, Modi seems determined to only exercise punitive leverage over Pakistan. And that is something that he continues to try and sell domestically. So I think that his frustration with how Operation Sindoor turned out actually makes him more dangerous for the next round.
So, Dr. Ilhan, let me end our conversation on more of a human note, that is hope. In your view, is there still a peace constituency in India, or has media driven nationalism and political polarization suffocated public opinion for cross border dialogue with Pakistan? And if the peace constituency in India exists, do they have enough influence to bring New Delhi back to the negotiating table with Pakistan?
I think that when you look at India's public discourse and its social media discourse, one of the things that really strikes me about it today, which was not the case 20 years ago or 25 years ago, or maybe even 10, 15 years ago, is that other than Israel, mainstream expression of happiness at the deaths of opponent civilians, including children, is only found in India. There is no other society in the world where the mainstream opinion, of course, there are always, the lunatic fringe in every society that is crazy and, does these things. But there is simply no other place except for India and Israel where it is perfectly okay to publicly express relish and joy at the deaths of enemy civilians, including children. So I'm afraid that Hindu nationalism has so dissolved the basic humanity of the adversary that they are no longer able to actually think of Pakistan or Pakistanis, or maybe even Muslims more broadly speaking, uh, as human beings with whom you can have a conflict, and that conflict can sometimes get violent. And yes, terrible things happen accidentally when such violence takes place between armies and states and empires or whatever in history. But fundamentally, the intent is not to inflict pain and suffering on the innocent population on the other side, even if that is what ends up happening as a result of these operations. But here, very clearly, that is the intent. So that kind of behavior is something which I think does not give me very much hope that there is a meaningful peace constituency left in India. When you look at the initial Indian attacks on Pakistan this time, the attacks were on civilian targets, particularly when it comes to Bahawalpur and Muridke. Pakistan took international media to these sites afterwards. I remember seeing Al Jazeera reporting from the site of a destroyed mosque, it seems, inside a larger compound. And maybe half a dozen children were killed in those attacks. And you just look at the way the Indians were treating it, that, well, those children would have grown up to be terrorists. So it's good that, they died now rather than later, which is exactly the way Zionists in Israel talk about the Palestinians. So I'm afraid that you are not dealing with now a country that operates within the parameters of a shared humanity. They don't think you are people, basically. So how do you negotiate with someone? How do you make peace with someone that doesn't even think you ought to exist, who celebrates the murder of your children openly, like in the mainstream, not even a question of, a few lunatics in a corner doing it, but everybody's doing it practically. When you look at what happened on the 8th of May with the Indian media and its huge claims of, we have attacked Karachi and Lahore, and we have bombed this and destroyed that and taken over this and invaded this and that. And just look at the way the Indian media, social media ecosystem erupted in sheer delight at that news. Now, it happened to be totally fake news, and Pakistanis were basically posting really funny memes about it. And that was also an interesting part of the conflict, where I think Pakistan did far better than the Indians. But it just basically shows you what they want essentially to happen. So I am not very optimistic that a peace constituency of any meaningful strength still exists in India. And in that context, this constituency did exist, I would say, till maybe 10 years ago, perhaps. But now it's really no longer there. So I think a lot of Pakistanis, maybe because, we don't follow developments in India all that closely, maybe, a lot of Pakistanis consume, let's say, Indian movies and shows and that sort of stuff. So their view of India perhaps is not very social scientific in that sense. It's more of the popular image that India wants to show of itself abroad. So they perhaps don't realize that there is I use this term carefully, there has been a Nazification of Indian thinking about Pakistan. And that is something which Pakistan's leaders and Pakistan's people, I don't think have really come to grips with. We still see, especially older generation Pakistanis, talking about the need for peace with India, normalization, trade, other such things, as if the India that they knew 30, 40 years ago is still there. And I'm afraid that that India is gone, and it might return at some point. I mean, at some point, the Indians themselves might realize, what are we doing, and snap out of it. But that is not something that Pakistan has any control over. So I'm very sorry to not be able to give you hope. But as a historian, I'm not in the hope business. I'm more in the rational analysis business. So that doesn't actually give me much hope as far as India is concerned.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Thank you so much, Dr. Ilhan, for sharing your insights with us. So we are going to wrap this discussion here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This was a sobering yet vital conversation on how history, strategy, and politics continue to shape the fault lines between India and Pakistan. Many thanks to Dr. Ilhan Niaz for sharing his thoughtful insights with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab, for joining us. If you found today's episode interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And do let us know what topics you would like us to cover next. Until next time, stay informed.